You're listening to the Good Question Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Our goal is to make each of our guests exclaim, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. Because when that happens, it means you, the listener, may be inspired to learn more beyond the interview and to ask great questions yourself that lead to new insights. In this podcast, we cover historical and current anthropology, comparative religion, and history. Welcome, and let's get started.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Good Question Podcast. My guest today is Vijay Balasubramaniyan. He's the founder and CEO of enterprise security leader Pindrop. So we will talk about preventing fraud and using voice biometrics and all of Vijay's work. So thanks for coming, Vijay. How are you doing?
Doing really well, Richard. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, tell me a bit about your background and then about Pindrop.
Yeah. So by way of background, I worked for many years in India. I worked at places like Intel, at Siemens. I worked even at Google. I did my PhD from Georgia Tech. And, when I was working in the telecommunications side of things originally. And then at places like Google, I worked on the voice over IP side of things. So, Google video chat and things like that. And then when I did my PhD in security. So those two things married together. And ultimately, the company that I started, Pindrop, was actually born out of my PhD research. And what we do here at Pindrop is fundamentally we try to solve two problems for organizations everywhere in the world, which is one, we help them identify in a remote interaction, are you talking to a real human or are you talking to a machine? And it's particularly relevant with all of the deep fakes that exist out there right now and all of the tooling with which you can create a deep fake. It's become a particularly meaningful problem. And the second problem that we solve is the right human. So once we're able to establish, it's not a machine, it's actually a real human on the other end of a remote interaction. Is it the right human? So is it really you, Richard? Or is, a fraudster sitting in West Africa trying to get your hard-earned bank account information or your life insurance or trying to steal a laptop from a retailer? And even things like family fraud, right? Is it your spouse? Is it your kids? Is it any of those situations? So we fundamentally solve those two problems. And we do that very elegantly. Traditionally, the way they try to identify you is by asking you tons of questions. We ask you, what's your mother's maiden name? What's your date of birth? And all of those inane questions.
Yeah, sound. I'm very auditory. I love sound, so it's important to me. I'll tell you an example of something strange. For years, they've had different things listen to you. Like they used to have Dragon Naturally Speaking. I don't know if you remember that. And, Google. And I've always had, I don't know why, I've always had a problem. I can't get these systems to understand what I'm saying. Even if I talk like this and I spell things out. And I don't know why. I would do Dragon. It wouldn't understand me. And then Google for a long time until recently. Now it does. But iPhone doesn't work. I read the training script and all that. Any insight into why?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Like a lot of these systems, ultimately, there's two parts to it, right? Like until deep learning came about, a lot of the machine learning and a lot of the systems couldn't quite capture the variability of human voice because, when you're using a deep learning system, you're building nonlinear systems at massive scale, which is, when you think about human voice, it's evolved over 10,000 years of evolution. And so there's so many variations to it. There are so many little things that you do with your voice that it's truly hard for a system to capture and understand until very recently, right? Like now when you have billion parameter systems that are nonlinear and can make all of these nonlinear connections, they can actually capture the variability of a whole bunch of voices. The second part of it, and this may not apply to you, is training data set that a lot of these systems use. Traditionally, because they couldn't make these correlations, they would train on very small sample sets. And when they would train on very small sample sets, you would discard a whole host of people and the way they speak. And so it would work for very specific demographics, but nothing outside a very narrow set. And that's also.
Okay.
So I think both of those things have changed, right? Like one, you can now train with massive amounts of data set because, the compute has, with GPUs and things like that, you've been able to conquer the compute. And then the second piece of it is the algorithms themselves can make these extremely non-linear correlations, which are super important for things like human voice.
Okay. That explains it. Yeah, like I'm in Austin, Texas. And when I first got my phone, I would say blah, 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 Austin. And it would give me Boston. I said, it drove me crazy. So even nowadays, I don't know what it is. I don't think my voice is that weird, but I just have problems. I don't know. Have you run into that where certain people, they just have the voice recognition has a really tough time with them?
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. We don't run into it because we don't really worry so much, Richard, about, accents or language or things like that. What we're trying to do is trying to catch the bad guys and trying to see if deepfakes are being created. And in either of those solutions, you don't really need to know this is Richard speaking or all the variation of human speech. What we need to know is this really human in its speech? And then the second question is, okay, once we've identified it's human, which human it is? And then the second part of that is it a bad guy, right? And so in those situations, language isn't as important. And so we are more concerned, like, for example, in the deepfake side of things, there are anomalies that these machines introduce into speech production, which is what we use to catch deepfake systems. And then the second side of it is when we're trying to identify you, we actually care about your vocal anatomy. So how is your throat shaped? How is your mouth shaped? How is your nasal cavity shaped? Not really how you say certain things.
Yeah, I'm just imagining that you guys analyze, like someone will speak. Yeah, let's say you want to protect someone that's in the public eye. You'll have them speak a script. I'm just guessing here. And then you'll look at the cadence, the intonation, the tonality, the frequency. You'll do like this voice print, is my guess, with X number of factors. And then if there's deep fakes, you can see a difference, right?
Yeah. No, actually, the deepfake problem we don't really care about who's speaking. And that's the beauty of how we've solved the big problem. What we over time built is, we have analyzed close to 5 billion voice interactions. So as a result of having all of that data, we know how humans speak. The second part of it is, how do these deepfake engines try to create your voice? And so what we're looking at is, what are anomalies in the audio that tell me that this is a machine that created it as opposed to a human? Just to give you a sense of what that means, there's two kinds of anomalies we look for. One is what's known as spectral anomalies, and the other is time-based anomalies. An example of a spectral anomaly is when you say the word San Francisco, and it doesn't matter who's saying it. No matter which human is saying it, you've managed to say the word by channeling noise. So when you hear the word S in San and F in Francisco, you're actually taking sh, the sound sh, and translating it to these phonemes. And the reason you're able to do that is because over 10,000 years, you've developed an overbite because you've started cultivating soft fruits. And so you're able to channel essentially noise into actual phonemes. And machines, when they do that, they do them wrongly because they're modeling these things wrongly. And so you're able to pick up on the fact that this was machine generated as opposed to human. Another example is when you say hello, Paul. Your mouth is wide open when you say hello, and it shuts down when you say Paul. Because you're human, there's only a certain speed with which you can do that. Machines don't care about that speed. And so oftentimes what we find out is when we analyze the audio, we're like, there's no human who could have produced this speech, because when we analyze this audio, this is speech coming from someone who has a 7-foot long neck and therefore is not human. And in fact, we name conference rooms after fraudsters we catch. There's a fraudster called Giraffe Man, because every time we catch audio coming from him, he's using a deep fake system to impersonate someone. And that deep fake system has this telltale sign that the configurations that it produces cannot be produced by humans.
Yeah. So, all right. So you're identifying if it's human or not.
Yeah.
Is it a much harder task, or is it a very different task to identify if it's me or not?
No,
If someone tries to clone my voice and fake it.
It's a different task, right?
Well, I know it's different, but is it how different is that task?
It's different in the sense that you're looking at other features in the audio, where in order to make sure if someone's cloned your voice, I don't really need to know whose voice has been cloned. As long as a machine who is in the middle of creating a version of a human speech, you can detect that, and you can detect artifacts that tell you which machine created it. So which AI tool was used to create this particular clone, we can actually tell you that as well. Yeah, so and that's how we were able to earlier this year when President Biden was actually deep fake. There was a lot of people who quickly figured out it was a deep fake, including us. But we were the ones who actually said not only is it a deep fake, but it was created by this AI application. There are already 350 AI applications that can clone your voice. We said it's a particular one, and then we got that particular AI application to shut down the person who had created the clone. And then, 1 month later, he came out saying, I was using, this AI application, and we got a whole bunch of news cycles because we'd predicted it about a month before. Each of these AI applications has a telltale signature in their inhumanness. And so we're able to not only say it's a deep fake, but it's inhuman in a very specific way. And that inhumanness is created by that particular AI application.
With all I don't know if you can answer this. It's okay if you can't, but could you create a deep fake that other people couldn't pick up on that have your equipment and experience and knowledge? Like, do you see a
We
path?
have that. No, we actually, our team at Pindrop, the labs team at Pindrop is doing that. So in machine learning, there's this area called GANs, which is adversarial networks which fight against each other. And the idea is you're telling a deepfake detector, you're creating a system that's a deepfake generator that can evade our deepfake detector. And so you keep playing them. So we actually have these deepfake creators that try to avoid our own deepfake generation many, many iterations in the future. Because, we've gone that many iterations. And it's interesting. What we found is, that's one thing that helps us stay ahead. But the interesting thing that we found is when you have a deepfake generator that has two objective functions, one to sound like Richard with all of your complications as a human, and then the second to avoid a deepfake detection engine, it has to pick one of those objective functions over time. And so what it starts doing is it starts saying, okay, if avoiding detection is more important, I'm going to start introducing things like noise to avoid me getting detected. And so it affects the quality of the legibility over multiple iterations. And so it's super interesting to see these machines play the chess game out and to see where they break.
What if you layered in someone else's voice on top of the voice you're trying to clone, but the layered in voice was really, really low volume and you tuned it so that it provided the noise? Is that a good way of masking, or is white noise better, or like what do you think?
Noise is a good way of masking, but that's where you can only add certain amounts of noise when you start getting illegible. And that's one of the things, right? Like, we fortify our systems by training the systems on incredible amounts of noise. Music is another one that tends to pose all kinds of challenges. But what you're suggesting, which is actually have a real human and convert their human speech to the target speaker, is known as a voice conversion attack. And attackers are already starting to do that. And you have to train your system to detect against those as well, where you have an actual speech production system. All you're doing is converting to a target speaker. But even when you're doing that, you're introducing artifacts because it's not the real speaker.
So, right now it's just a general question, but Are you confident that you'll be able to outwit hackers, or is this like getting scary where it's really good? There's a very fine line between you being able to detect and people being able to obfuscate.
Yeah. So, it's always an arms race in security, Richard. But the thing that, I've been doing security for a really long time. The thing that you always anchor down to is what's the cost of your detection versus the cost of generation. And as long as those things are comparable, you can keep pace. Right now, the cost of detecting a deepfake is 4 orders of magnitude cheaper than generating one. And the reason is simple, right? Because in order to generate your voice, I have to care about your tone. When you use things like disfluencies, the ums and ahs, your mood, all of your demographic information, your emotion and things like that, I can't have a monotone. But in order to detect a deepfake, I have to catch one mistake. And when you are in audio, for example, there are 8,000 samples of your voice every single second in a call center. On this Zoom call, there are 16,000 samples of your voice every second. When you're making music, there's 44,000 samples a second. I have to find what take in those 8,000 samples in a second, right? And so you just have so much data. And the problem is finding one mistake as opposed to generating everything. And that's the reason the cost of detecting is so much cheaper than the cost of generation. As long as we can keep that asymmetry going, the detection will win out. And it's happened in many cases. Like in spam, people started creating more and more spam in all kinds of clever ways, hiding it in images. But all of that was complicated to create. And the detection kept pace. And the problem was it was so much cheaper to detect that spam's gone away. At one point in time, I remember my email inbox, 95% of the email that I got was spam. And now
I remember.
It's not even a thing, right? And so as long as the generation is costlier than the detection will win out, or whichever is costlier will win out.
Oh, something just came to mind. So I imagine like a political figure on stage speaking into a microphone, and the microphone has a technology that if the speaker says or ah, it automatically takes it out before it projects the sound. It can change the voice to sound, let's say, sweeter or different. It can maybe even replace words that are inappropriately used. Is a technology like that possible?
There is. There's already technology like that. And there's technology that allows you to take like a politician and appeal to constituents where he doesn't know their language. This happens in India where you have 1,500 dialects. And so there are politicians who are using generative AI to actually go speak in languages that they don't know so that they can appeal to constituents in those languages. And so there's a lot of...
You can do this live, like during a speech live, you can?
The systems live are getting better. You still have pauses. Live is still a challenge, man. But, in terms of recorded content, for sure, that's a solved problem.
Wow. It's scary to imagine what this can do. Crazy.
Yeah, it's amazing. The speed at which these systems get generated, the languages, the dialects. I remember, Richard, when we were starting to do deepfake research. It was 8 years back. Nobody cared about deepfakes back then. We cared about it. And I remember, right, like there used to be one tool called Lyrebird, which could clone your voice. And I remember John Legend becoming the voice of Google Home. It took 20 hours of content from him, and many of that recorded in a pristine studio so that Google Home could respond in John Legend's voice saying, the weather in San Francisco is 30 degrees, or in his, wonderfully lilting voice. But it took 20 hours. Right now, to clone your voice, all it requires is 5 to 7 seconds of your voice. And with 15 seconds of your voice, we can create an incredibly realistic clone.
What about, I don't know why, I just love this stuff. That's why ideas keep coming. What if you had earphones and you go about, you speak, but the sound that the earphones give back to you allows you to train your brain and modulate your speech to eliminate an accent or to speak in a way that you want to speak? Like, are there systems for that coming?
No, they're already here. So, we play in the call center space a lot. So you can imagine there's a lot of call center, technology that we deal with. But there are call center technology that, because call centers are distributed all over the world, you have people with a lot of different accents. And certain people are fine with the accents. Certain people find it hard to understand these accents and, how you speak and things like that. So there are companies that, I could be like, let's just take my example. I have an Indian accent. And for some people, maybe that's hard to understand. I'm speaking, but the accent that comes out is a Western accent that you can probably understand much better. And so the companies that are already doing that live while a actual real-time conversation is happening.
Oh, so someone will speak with an accent, let's say like yours, but me on the other line, I'll hear it. It'll be modulated, so it'll sound a lot more Western.
Yes, absolutely. And that's already happening.
What about for individuals? Let's say, again, I don't know what the problems are people have with their voice, but again, let's say someone wants to do accent removal, or they just want to learn to speak in a different way or in a better way.
Yeah.
Do you have do they have training systems where you can, again, you get this feedback in your ear and you can train your voice yourself?
That I'm not sure, where you are using, this is like the great Android case, right? Like where human and machine combine to become better humans, right? And so, this probably something like that, Richard. I have not paid attention to that part of the space, so I don't know the answer to the question.
Well, at least I finally stumped you.
It's actually pretty easy to stump me. So, if I love the audio space, I play a lot in it, but if you go outside it, I probably don't have great answers.
No, that's okay. You're doing a lot of really cool stuff. So where are deepfakes a problem? Like, where is your technology critical to avoid fraud and problem?
Yeah, so right now we see three big areas. One is commerce, and we are in 8 of the top 10 banks, 5 of the top 7 insurance, some of the biggest healthcare providers, biggest retailers. And what we're seeing is deepfakes are used. Last year it wasn't as big a problem, so we'd see one deepfake a month across our entire customer base. This year we're seeing one deepfake a day per customer, and there are certain customers who get a deepfake every 3 hours. So there's been a 1400% increase in the amount of deepfakes in the first 6 months of this year, and that these are stats when we looked at it 6 months back, or couple of months back, and so that number is going to just keep getting worse and worse. So there's a lot of deepfake attacks happening already where, when you have a high value account or you have a business account or a treasury account and things like that, people are going after life insurance, a big life insurance amount. They're going after impersonating who they're targeting. So that's absolutely happening already. Also seeing it in media, right? Like, so if you see, for example, recently there was a music video by Justin Bieber called Diddy Party, which wasn't him. This is happening a lot in social media and news media. We've been brought into several of these cases. There's one where, LeBron James was apparently criticizing the coach during the Olympics, Steve Kerr. It wasn't him. We identify it was a deep fake. We helped their team show all the data and analysis to X to help qualify that was AI generated and wasn't LeBron James. And so there's a lot of these things in media, both in news media and, social media, where a lot of this content is spreading disinformation. And so we're seeing use cases there. And then in communication, right? Like we're on a Zoom call. There's a CFO of an engineering firm called Arup who, there's a finance worker who got on a call, thought he was speaking to the CFO. He'd actually gotten a phishing email before that, said there was a phishing email. It isn't my CFO because clearly something is off. And then the CFO said, if you don't believe me, get on the Zoom call. He got on the Zoom call, saw his CFO in face, in voice, spoke exactly like a CFO, looked exactly like a CFO, asked him to wire $25 million, and he went ahead and did it, right? He did $25 million in 16 different wires. And so these attacks are very real. They have very real consequences. And, it's happening with senior citizens, right? Senior citizens are losing their life savings. They're falling into romance scams. It's awful. It's just all across the board with very real consequences.
So are you guys, I mean, you don't have to say, obviously, if you don't want to, but I would think that it would be really important for you guys to work with Android platform and iPhone platform and build this in so the phone natively can tell, at least if a human's on the other end or a machine, and let you know, like, alert, this is not a human voice or something like that,
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, we're working with partnerships where, they're all very nascent, right? With the carriers, right? Like there's multiple ways to solve that problem, either on the handset, like the iPhone or the Android, or through the carriers who give you the calls. So we're working all of those angles. We're traditionally an enterprise company, so we know that, but, we're offering up our technology to these folks as they're looking to solve the exact problems that you're talking. And, just FYI, we already have partnerships in this space. So we have a company called True Media that helps media companies solve for it on the media side of it. We have a partner called Umail where, you can download an app that will then tell you whether the call that you're on is a deep fake or not. We're working with other such apps to offer our solutions in their platforms.
What other uses are you guys going to be putting this out for? I'm thinking of everything I can, but what am I missing? What else? Where else could this be used?
Yeah, we are fundamentally looking at any time in a remote first world there's any sort of impersonation, right? Is it, employees being impersonated when, you're trying to reset your password? We're seeing even at Pindrop's, we are a 300-person shop. Our people ops team or our HR team in the last month has gotten 4 candidates who aren't who they say they are. And so we are getting deep fakes and, synthetic candidates who don't exist at our scale. And so we're seeing this use case pop up in a lot of our customers where they're finding employees are either having multiple jobs or the employee that they thought they had over the last 6 months isn't them. In some cases, they turn out to be nation state actors who've been, siphoning out IP and all kinds of confidential information. So anytime there's employee impersonation, customer impersonation, or third-party impersonation, we want to be there helping you identify that it's one, not a deep fake, and two, it's really Richard.
That's crazy that the number of attacks is growing exponentially. It sounds like you're going to have to combine this identification with things like geolocation. Maybe a text to a phone's not even enough, but I don't know. So all the software that does this cloning and these deep fakes, is it stuff that people can just program themselves, or is it like really sophisticated software that is really only produced commercially?
No. You don't even have to program anything. They have wonderful looking UIs. You just have to go click a few buttons. So what you'll have to do is you'll have to go to, I'll tell you this typical workflow in a software, right? You go on, it'll say, hey, you want to clone a voice, upload a sample of the voice that you want to clone. So, if you've recorded your voice anywhere, you just upload it. If you have somebody else's voice, upload that. And then it'll say, okay, check to let me know that you have consent to, upload this particular voice. Obviously, you're going to go the straight and narrow. You're going to make sure you have the right consent. But, an attacker is not going to care about it. Is going to, check the consent, check that thing. And then once you say that, and then you say, then you can type anything and you can say, hey, I want you to say this in this voice, and it'll say it in this voice. The newer systems allow you to say, hey, you don't even have to tell me what to say. Just tell me what's the nature of the conversation you need to have. So you can say, hey, I am the CEO of Pindrop, and I want to tell my employee to wire $25 million because I want to buy this company. And so have a conversation with this employee and answer any questions he might have. Make sure you keep telling him wherever you don't have an answer, it's confidential. And the system using a large language model will just generate content and speak as me answering any question in real time. So it'll be a perfectly natural conversation that you can have with a bot and you don't even know it's a bot.
Well, like I said, what if we were able to combine geolocation and other factors to really, reduce the attack surface?
Yeah, that's what we do, right? We identify, is it Richard's voice? Is it Richard's device? And the device includes things like geolocation, IP addresses, all kinds of things, right? So we're looking at acoustic characteristics of your device that tell me it's really your device. Then behavior, what is Richard doing? Is that behavior typically what he does? If you press certain keys during a session, is that the typical way in which you press those keys? If you're pressing certain keys on information that you typically should know based on muscle memory, is there a muscle memory component to it? So we're looking at things like voice, device, behavior, network, risk, and a consortium of what bad actors do to actually arrive at this answer of, is this really Richard?
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. You can't tune it in too much or tighten it down too much because then no one would get past it, but you can't go too loose either. So it's really weird.
No, and that way we have to play the false positive, false negative game. And so far, we've been able to do it very, very successfully with these really large organizations at a scale calls that's really massive.
Physiologically, is anyone studying what happens to a person's voice? I don't know, will my voice sound differently when, within an hour of me waking up, not me going, but again, in the morning, will my voice sound different from the evening if I didn't wake all day?
No, it absolutely does. And so we train on data on morning conversations because, as soon as you have a certain grogginess, and especially if you've partied the previous night, drunk a lot, you have a frog in your throat. So there are data sets that allow you to look at that kind of data, but also even aging. Over time, your voice just changes over time. And we've studied, for example, extreme forms of aging. So, for example, we have papers around this, right? Like when you look at President Obama over his 8-year term, his voice, he was a thick baritone. His voice went, frequencies higher over the 8 years of his job, the first 7 years, the frequency went higher and higher. So, and then in his 8th year, it came down because I think he was finally, not as stressed. And now it's back to normal. And so we study things like that to understand how people age. But what we found is, depending upon when you're in your 20s or your 30s or your 40s, your voice ages in certain ways, and we have to account for those things.
So I guess for like high value executives, maybe they would go through a recurring baselining of their voice, like instead of 5 to 7 seconds,
I mean, where you have that data, that is absolutely something you can lean on. But there are certain situations where you don't have that data. So a great example is we protect life insurance companies. When was the last time you called your life insurance company, right? And so, you typically call them when you have a situation and you've taken the policy way back when. And so many, many years have passed between the time you've first talked to them and then you're asking for certain questions on your life insurance. And so you have to be able to handle those kinds of situations as well when you don't have access to an individual over that intermediate period in time.
So do you think that consumers are going to start being asked to baseline certain biometrics, when they deal with a company like life insurance in the future?
No, you don't need to. That's what I'm saying. You can model age and you can fast forward age based on initial voice.
Yeah, like I've seen on TV where they show like someone, like someone's gone missing, then they age them to current day. So you can, so I can, like, if I asked you, you can tell me what my voice will sound like when I'm, let's say 70 or 80.
Yes, what the model will say your voice looks like.
Weird. That's so freaky,
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, man.
We actually had for some time, we used to do this really cool thing. We used to have a public facing site where you could speak and it would tell you the age of the person that was speaking.
Oh, how accurate is it?
It has a mean error rate of eight years. So it'll predict your age within an 8-year boundary.
Wow. Well, I guess, again, if you did baselining on that person or if you had a voice sample, then you could really.
Yeah, then you could.
Now with like.
Yeah, you could ratchet.
Like with Obama's voice, you could tell.
Oh, for sure.
No problem, right?
You could tell, was it Obama in, 90s or 2000s or even 91, 92? You could be very precise.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh, really interesting. So you can, this could be used in like provenance applications, and that's so crazy. How rich is the data of someone's voice? Like
very rich. I mean, it's one of those things which your voice is a pretty dynamic thing, right? Like unlike your face, right? Like your face doesn't change that rapidly every second. Your voice does. And I don't mean it doesn't age every second, but you do so many things every second with your voice. It's super rich. And that's the beauty of a human voice. Even in this conversation, I've gone through so many modalities or so many intonations of my own voice when I'm excited, when I'm not so excited, when I'm talking about something that I know, when I'm talking about something that I don't know. Like that's the richness of a human voice. And it is incredible. As we study it, it's got all of these crazy attributes to it. Your entire physiology is built. There's this very famous quote by Stephen Hawking. I'm a big Pink Floyd fan. And so, there's a song called Division Bell. And it starts off with this quote with Stephen Hawking. For millions of years, mankind lived like the animals. And then we learned to talk. And that's fundamentally it, right? Like what differentiates us from animals is our ability to speak. And by our ability to speak, we can plan. And by our ability to plan, we can think ahead. And so it's just one of the incredible human things.
I'm sure there's health applications too. You can, you'll be able to hear, okay, based on the way this person's speaking, they're heading into cognitive decline or they have this condition or whatever it may be. Are you going to take your technology and like license it out for that kind of stuff, or are you going to do that in-house?
Yeah. So, that's a question. Like right now, we're not addressing those, but you're absolutely right. Those things can be done as well. Hey, just one thing, your Jillian's AI note taker doesn't seem to be capturing any of this conversation, largely because it says it's quiet in here. So I don't know if that's a recent thing or it's never been capturing any of this stuff. So I just wanted to let you know.
Yeah, I'm trying to know. This is really fascinating. I'm trying to think of, I know you can't say everything, obviously. You have to have proprietary stuff to protect what you're doing. But it's just really amazing, all the different things you could figure out. Yeah. Like I took opera singing lessons for a while. So I remember I was reading to my son, and then I changed to being more of an operatic voice. And I said, does it sound different to you? And he's like, yeah, sounds very different. So like placement of where your voice is in your mouth, and some people are nasal, some people are more like in the throat. And it's just really interesting, all the things and the intonations and things you can get from voice. Emotion detection, I'm sure is a big part of it, right?
Yeah, it is. It is. It is. You can detect emotions. You can detect, we're able to detect one of 9 different emotions. Those are all that Matt, for now, for the things that we do are important. Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you angry? All of those things. So yeah, you can absolutely detect emotions based on voice.
Okay. Well, what do you see as the, maybe the near-term future, since things are moving so fast? Even 5 years out, what does this look like, you think?
Yeah. So for us, we think, we're at a very pivotal moment, because if you think about, we're a security company, and security companies have been built based on a big, massive transition that's happened, right? So when PCs came out, the companies that did antivirus software on your computer became big. When, the internet came out, all the companies that protected you from the internet, firewalling companies, they became big. When the cloud came out, cloud security companies became big. So now that AI is here, which is the big transformation, we think a company that can always tell you, is it human or is it machine? And is it the right human, is going to become the next big security company. So our sights are on trying to be that company where if you're in a remote conversation, we're the ones telling you authentically that this is really Richard, is not a deep fake of that person, is not his, son who can speak very similar to him, his twin who can speak very similar to him, is not a fraudster sitting out of West Africa. Like, that's our core focus. And we think there's so much market to go after there, especially with the AI transformation that's happening, that's going to be our single-minded focus.
Do you think you could fix auto-tuning, please, to make it better? It's really horrible.
I think we'll leave for someone else.
Yeah. Well, very cool. So where can people find out more about Pindrop? Where can they go?
Just go to www.pindrop.com. It's as simple as that. And, you can find a whole bunch of resources about Pindrop, what we do, about our prowess in the audio and the voice domain, voice spaces, what we do in deepfakes. And you'll also see where we're going next, right? Like, we're going into video and other real-time communication modes. And so, check us out at www.pindrop.com.
Oh, and last question. The best in the world at imitating voices, from your perspective, how good are they? What are they doing?
It's super easy to catch them. They're trying to sound like you, but because they don't have your vocal track, like, Jordan Peele, who can sound like Obama, doesn't have Obama's vocal track. And so, though it might sound very good to your ear, and the reason it sounds very good to your ear is actually trying to do pattern matching all the time. Because if it actually picked out all of these subtle differences, you'll have problems, right? Like, many times your ear actually picks out the difference, but your brain says, no, it's too close. I don't care, right? Like, because otherwise you'd be so swimming in too much information that it'll make your head explode. Your ear and brain are pattern matching systems. So they're always saying, as long as it's close, I'm going to get convinced. That's not the job of an algorithm that's specialized in detecting these things. And so imitators are super easy for us to catch.
Okay. Well, very good. Vijay, this has been a great interview. I loved it. I hope you had a good time, and thanks so much for coming.
No, thank you, Richard. I thought your questions were incredible.
Thank you for listening to the Good Question Podcast. Please email support@thegoodquestionpodcast.com if you have any referrals to great guests for us to interview. Visit thegoodquestionpodcast.com to hear more interviews. And please help us spread the word by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to this podcast.